Hello everyone. Today in this video I'll be talking about the sternum. So I have the manubrium sterni and the body of the sternum, right? These two parts haven't fused actually, that's why it are due to separate achen. Okay, but don't worry, I'll be explaining it one by one. Okay, so talking about the manubrium sterni, the manubrium sterni forms the anterior boundary of the superior mediastinum, right? It forms the anterior boundary of the superior mediastinum. What are its presenting features? Anterior surface. On the anterior surface, এইভাবে, okay, in this way is attached the pectoralis major muscle, like this, right? And তারপর এটা goes down into the body of the sternum, pectoralis major muscle. Then you have the lateral borders. Lateral border between, you have a costal facet here, you have a demifacet here. Okay, between the two costal notches, the costal facets, you have this lateral border. This space forms the anterior boundary of the first intercostal space. It gives attachment to the anterior intercostal membrane and the intercostalis internus muscle, right? The first costal facet gives attachment to the first costal rib to form the first sternocostal joint, which is a primary cartilaginous joint, ossifies at 25 years of age. Here there is a demifacet. এটা আমি পরে বলছি, sorry. Okay. So on the superior surface কি দেখা যাচ্ছে? This part is the clavicular notch. These two are the clavicular notches, and this part is the jugular notch, the suprasternal notch, right? So the clavicular notch gives attachment to the sternal end of the clavicle, forming the sternoclavicular joint, which is a saddle type of synovial joint. Ligaments ki involved? Anterior clavicular ligament, posterior clavicular ligament, capsular ligament. Also the interclavicular ligament, which is attached to the suprasternal notch, right? Now in the interclavicular ligament কোথায় attached আছে? Suprasternal notch, ঠিক আছে? Now the anterior and posterior margins of the interclavicular ligament gives attachment to the anterior and posterior slips of the deep cervical fascia, and it actually looks like this. If you see the picture, it actually looks like this. This is the anterior slip, this is the posterior slip of the deep cervical fascia, and this space is called the suprasternal space of Burns. ঠিক আছে? So this was all about the superior border. Posterior surface, smooth, yeah, it's smooth. Upper part gives attachment to sternohyoid. Lower part, okay, the lower part gives attachment to the sternothyroid muscles. So upper part is sternohyoid near the clavicular notches, and in the lower part is sternothyroid. ঠিক আছে? Now relations, anterior surfaces, there is nothing much relation there. Skin, superficial fascia, these things are related to the anterior surface, while posterior surface relation কি আছে? You have, see, from the middle of the clavicular notch, like this and then this, okay, oblique, then vertically. There is we have actually imagined it, okay, it's not in reality so neat and smooth, neat and accurate, okay, it's not like that, but yes, a rough estimation, it is related to the oblique lines, the oblique lines of the lung and the pleura, ঠিক আছে? It is related, মানে these are all oblique lines, okay, which I was showing. So it is related to the lung and pleura. ठीक है, pleural lining and lung. Now beneath that, beneath the lung and pleura, in the lower segment, in the lower region is present the arch of aorta, and the upper part of the manubrium sterni is present the left brachiocephalic vein, which crosses obliquely, obviously from left to right. It crosses the left common carotid artery, the left subclavian artery, and the brachiocephalic trunk. Brachiocephalic trunk gives rise to which two arteries? The common carotid artery and the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. Clear? So this is the entire relation of the posterior surface of manubrium sterni. Very important. Another thing very extremely important regarding sternum, যেটা তোদের মানে পেপারে অনেক জিজ্ঞেস করবে, in your viva it will be asked frequently, is this angle. অ্যাঙ্গেলের আগে বলে দিই, this joint is called the manubriosternal joint or the manubriosternal joint. ঠিক আছে, this joint is called the manubriosternal joint. ঠিক আছে, and here there forms an angle. This angle is called the sternal angle, also called the angle of Louis. ঠিক আছে, its value is 162 degree. Yes, and the clinical significance, it is highly, very clinically significant. Okay, what are its clinical significance? First of all, it helps in the counting of ribs. Cano, it corresponds to the second costal cartilage, second costal rib. Yes, see, there is one demifacet on the body of the sternum, another demifacet on the lower part of the manubrium. Both demifacets fuse and form a single facet. Yes, form a single facet which gives attachment to the second costal rib. Yes, second costal cartilage, so second costal rib. So it helps in counting of ribs. তারপরে যা count করা করতে পারিস subsequently. Then you have the bifurcation of trachea, bifurcation of pulmonary trunk, end of the ascending aorta, beginning of the descending aorta, and the beginning and end of the arch of aorta all occur at the level of sternal angle. Yes, the the recurrent laryngeal nerve loops under the aortic arch. Yes, loops under the aortic arch at the level of the sternal angle. Yes, the azygos vein loops over the root of the lung to join the superior vena cava at the level of the sternal angle. Yes, so these are the clinical significance of the sternal angle. Also, an imaginary line is drawn from the sternal angle till T4 to divide the superior mediastinum from the lower mediastinum, my middle, anterior and posterior mediastina. Yes, that's for making the chest region a little bit easier in understanding, right? Mediastinum division help করে অনেক, right? Otherwise these যা যা আমি বললাম, all these points are very very important. ঠিক আছে, the sternal angle corresponds to the lower border of the T4 vertebra. This was all about the sternal angle and the manubrium sterni. Talking about the body of the sternum, See, if they give you the sternum, okay, wholly or only the body or even this, hold it always in such a way that the anterior surface faces upwards and forwards, okay, posterior surface faces downwards, and backwards. Obviously, the tip of the sternum, that is the xiphoid process, should point downwards, should point downwards and forwards, right? And anterior surface obviously faces upwards and forwards. এইভাবে ধরবি, এইভাবে ধরবি, ঠিক আছে? আচ্ছা, so talking about the body of the sternum, it is formed by the fusion of four segments, four sternal segments, also called the sternibra, ঠিক আছে? 1, 2, 3, 4, all separated by three transverse ridges, faint transverse ridges. You have 1, 2, 3 transverse ridges. Okay, lateral border also, obviously it has costal facets. Okay, between the costal facets there is space. Obviously, the lateral border gives attachment, between these facets gives attachment to the anterior intercostal membrane, ja bolechi regarding the manubrium, ঠিক আছে, and the intercostalis internus muscle, and forms the anterior boundary of each of the intercostal space, right? This was about the lateral border. Anterior surface, as I said, pectoralis major on both the sides, ঠিক আছে, থাকবে, ঠিক আছে? Relation কিছুই নেই, skin, superficial fascia, that's it, right? And all, obviously each of the facets gives attachment to the costal cartilage and the rib, obviously. But mind it, all the sternocostal joints are synovial joints except the first sternocostal cartilage, except the first sternocostal joint, which is a primary cartilaginous joint, right? Understood? This is the thing about anterior surface and lateral border, right? Coming to the posterior surface, here you see in the lower part you have sternocostalis muscle attached, ঠিক আছে? Relation is very important here. কি হচ্ছে রিলেশনটা? Well, on the right side you have the lung and pleura throughout, but on the left side, in the upper two segments, you have the left lung and left pleura, obviously. But below that, in the lower two segments, the pericardium of the heart is directly related to the posterior surface of the body of sternum. And this region is called the region of superficial cardiac dullness, ঠিক আছে? This is called the region of superficial cardiac dullness, right? And nothing much is there about posterior surface. This is very important, okay? Now, the body of the sternum, the lower border, attaches to the xiphoid process. Here the xiphoid process can't be seen, it has actually broken. Yeah, but listen to me carefully. The xiphoid process and the lower border of the body of sternum gives attachment to the xiphoid the xiphy-sternal joint, gives attachment to the xiphy-sternal joint, which corresponds to the intervertebral disc between T8 and T9, which corresponds to the intervertebral disc between T8 and T9. ठीक है? Right. And obviously the entire body of the sternum extends from T5 to T8. ठीक है? You can understand that because the sternal angle lies at the level of the lower border of T4. So T5 থেকে শুরু হবে. Now the tip of the xiphoid process gives attachment to the linea alba, right? The lateral border of the xiphoid process gives attachment to the transversus abdominis muscle and the aponeurosis of the internal oblique muscle. The anterior surface gives attachment to the rectus abdominis muscle. Okay, the anterior surface gives attachment to rectus abdominis muscle and the aponeurosis of internal and external oblique muscles. All these form the anterior abdominal wall. All these form the anterior abdominal wall. On the posterior surface of the xiphoid process, there is attachment of the attachment of the sternal slip of diaphragm. There is attachment of sternal slip of diaphragm. Now, congenitally, it might happen that the sternal slip is not attached, does not get attached to the xiphoid process. তখন কি হয়? Then a foramen is formed, which is called the foramen of Morgagni, through which retrosternal diaphragmatic hernia occurs. Another congenital defect is what? When there is lack of fusion of the sternibra key, the four segments of the body of sternum. So if there is lack of fusion of the sternibra, then there is like the heart of the baby comes out on the outer surface, giving rise to a condition called ectopia cordis. This was all about the xiphoid process, the entire sternum. Just that, talking about the centers of ossification, there are three primary centers for manubrium sterni. The first two segments of the body of sternum have one center each, while the lower two segments have a pair of centers each. My duto kore primary center for each of the sternibra. So these are all the important points about sternum. This was all about sternum, right? Thank you for listening and see you in the next video.